Hey everybody, I'm Amanda with DevExpress and welcome to today's webinar, Getting Started with the DevExpress Report Server, presented by CTO Julian Bucknall and Technical Evangelist Paul Usher. In this session, see how easy it is to get up and running with the powerful DevExpress Report Server, delivering enterprise quality reporting and BI the simple way. In this presentation, Paul and Julian will show you how to install the report server in minutes, implement role-based reports, maintain users, create categories and data views, create reports via the web designer or desktop designer, schedule reports for time distribution, and version control. This session is being recorded and it will be made available on our DevExpress YouTube channel later today. We will also do a live Q&A at the end of this presentation. Just type your questions in the GoToWebinar control panel at any time throughout the broadcast. All right, thank you so much for joining us. I will now hand things over to Paul and Julian.
Thank you, Amanda, and good morning, everyone. Welcome to Getting Started with the DevExpress Report Server. And to answer all my questions, I have Mr. Bucknall with me.
Me answer your questions? I thought your questions were already answered. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the webinar, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, or as in Paul's case, I think it's good middle of the night.
Well, it's 5 a.m. now. Sunny Canberra today. See the politicians. It's going to be fun.
Oh.
So, of course, it's a special week this week, Julian, because it is the 20th birthday of
Visual Studio.
So it's certainly an exciting time to be presenting some of this stuff. And we've I think, got a birthday surprise at the end too, don't we?
We do indeed. So stay tuned. We'll talk about it when we get to the end of the webinar. Once we've introduced Report Server, there is a little birthday or Visual Studio birthday surprise. So what were you doing 20 years ago in terms of programming then, Paul?
Well, it's interesting because I started with pre-Visual Studio with Microsoft Tools and been a big .NET advocate since the very start. So
Cool.
love Visual Studio. In fact, even when I'm working on languages such as Objective-C or Swift, I wish Visual Studio would have babies with Xcode so we could get some proper development done on those platforms.
Oh, I see.
Let's have a look at what we're going to be doing today. Quick agenda. We're going to look through licensing, installation. I'll take you through the administration areas of the product and, as Amanda mentioned, how to set up users, etc., etc. Now, the goal here is to give you an end-to-end view of the Report Server product and to explain how it's different to some of our other tools. We're not going to be spending too much time in the actual report designer, but we're going to do a full webinar on that in a few weeks' time instead. So the goal is that after today's presentation, you'll have a good understanding of what the product is, how to install it, how to configure it, how to start using it, and do all the management aspects of it. First, I want to talk about licensing, Julian, because it's a little bit different to our other products. So how does the licensing aspect work?
So Report Server is an actual application that we provide for sale as part of Universal. Universal does have a Report Server instance as part of it. So it's not a it doesn't form part of our user interface suites or our frameworks or anything like that. You get the finished application. You don't get the source code. It is an application to be run on a server on your network to produce reports, and we'll go through all that, obviously, the scheduling or scheduling of it and so on and so forth. So it's an actual application. So the licensing is not a developer license because there is no development in it at all. It is a complete application. Licensing is licensing your end users. And to license your end users or your customers' end users, you require what's called a CAL, or a Client Access License, CAL. Universal comes with Report Server with 5 CALs, so 5 users can be registered with Report Server and use it. Standalone Report Server, if you purchase that, say you're a consulting company and you produce an application or a system for your customer, then your customer if he's going to be using Report Server to get at reports and to schedule reports and so on and so forth, will require a standalone license of Report Server. Report Server is going to be licensed to you when you purchase it, or to whoever purchases it, and it comes with 15 CALs, or client access licenses. And if you have more users than 15, we do provide additional CALs in packs of 5, and the sky's the limit at that particular point. And as you'll see as we go through, what you're going to be doing the Report Server is to register users to use Report Server, in other words, to be able to view reports, create reports, schedule reports, and so on and so forth. And those registered users can have access to the various services that Report Server provides. So licensing, it's not a developer license because you're not developing with it, so it's not like our normal stuff. It's more like an application that you purchase, a server application that you purchase from a third party, for example.
Now, a couple of things that you brought up there. What we're seeing here with the universal standalone, they are subscriptions, so they to be renewed in order to keep up to date with the product. They form part of that annual renewal. However, the additional CALs are a one-off purchase. So
That's
if
right.
you buy...
They're lifetime, if you like, yes, quite right.
And then you mentioned that a user registered with the product uses one of those CALs. And you reference the fact that people could view reports. To be clear, if you're using the report scheduler and you're a recipient of a report via email, that's not a CAL. There's no requirement for that. You can get a PDF or the embedded HTML version of the report. You just simply can't access the tool to go in and look at other reports or drill into things.
Exactly. So if you say a marketing company, for example, and you do a monthly email blast using Report Server, then yes, you can send your email blast out to 20,000 people. You don't need 20,000 CALs, obviously, otherwise it would never work. So it's just you, the marketing company, need the number of CALs you have for your staff to be able to send out those 20,000 or 30,000 emails or whatever it happens to be.
Cool. Okay, so after licensing, let's talk about some system requirements. In order to run the DevExpress Report Server, you need to have Windows Server 2008 R2 or Windows Server version 2012, 2012 R2 or above, Windows 7, 8 or 10, and you need some other prerequisites such as SQL Server installed. Now we support SQL Server 2005 and above, and it will also work with SQL Server Express. Because it's a web-based platform, obviously you need IIS installed, version 7 or greater, and .NET 4 or above. You need, and it is a prerequisite, to have access to an SMTP mail server. Now, that doesn't mean you've got to have a dedicated software installed. In the example I'm showing you today, I'm authenticated with my Office 365 account for outgoing mail. And then there's some Windows activation or features that need to be set up on your machine, such as HTTP activation, HTTP errors and static content, and the Windows authentication. Now that's pretty straightforward of jumping into Control Panel, add or remove features, and you can turn those particular things on. And of course the beauty is IIS is baked into Windows 7 and above, so you don't even need a server product to get up and running. In fact, today's presentation is running on my copy of Windows 10. Now installing the core product is really straightforward. You can download the files straight from the DevExpress site, either in trial or registered mode, and you're going to see a familiar DevExpress style installation wizard. Pick which one you want, trial or registered, and as you step through, you're going to be presented with some nice options. So destination and the license agreement. You then get to choose what type of package you want. So I'm going to focus for the minute on the core product, which is the website worker task scheduler service. If I select next, I get the option of saying what I want my IIS instance to be called and the port that I want to be serving that from. There's a default entry in there, which is fine. Next, again, I'm going to be prompted to enter my SQL Server details. Now, obviously, SQL Server doesn't have to be on the same machine. You've just got to have access to a SQL Server connection. The software will create a new database, and you can choose either the SQL authentication or you can choose Windows authentication.
And pretty much, just to emphasize there, Paul, the SQL Server connection we're putting in here during the install is the SQL Server connection that Report Server is going to use to store its data, so its list of users, its list of roles, its list of categories, and so on and so forth. This has got nothing to do with the reports it's going to be serving up. This is more to do with its own internal data so it can function properly.
Absolutely, and I'll cover the data providers that we support in just a little while. Now, if you don't have HTTP activation set up, you'll see a message such as this one at the end saying that basically it is a prerequisite for the end user designer, the desktop end user designer, to be able to talk to the service. Now, in recent releases, we went full no longer CTP or no longer preview with the web designer, and so of course you can also just use the web designer as well. You don't have to run the desktop component. Now, there is this thing called a worker role, and the worker role is important if you want to do load balancing across multiple servers. So if you've got a lot of work going on, a lot of large reports, you can install the worker role itself to actually talk back to the service, but it will do the generation of the reports and pushing out to your end users. So very handy in the sense of a multi-server scenario or a lot of users. To install the worker role, you'd simply select the worker role option on the initial wizard, and then you need to provide some validation and decryption keys, which are provided inside the admin panel, which I'll show you shortly. They get entered into the setup wizard, and then again you point to the SQL box, and pretty much that is it. So from an installation perspective, it is really straightforward. The thing that I must stress is that SMTP settings, when I get to the admin panel, you will need to actually have that before you can add users or do other things, so that is critical. Now, before I jump into the actual product here, if you want to install the desktop product, it's included in the installation, and it's a straightforward wizard, pick your destination, run, and it's installed. And I'll be jumping into that a little bit later on as well. But right now, let's jump across to the actual product. We can see I have Visual Studio 2017 proudly running on my machine, which I've been running since early beta, and actually do love it. And of course, Julian, all our products now are SIM shipped with 2017.
Yes, indeed. Version 16.1 and version 16.2, there are two minor releases which released, I believe, the 28th of February. Both support Visual Studio 2017, so you can install our user interface controls for WinForms, ASP.NET, WPF, UWP, and so on and so forth inside Visual Studio 2017. Now, obviously, with Visual Studio 2017, it depends on how you've installed that. If you've installed Visual Studio 2017 just for, say, a Node.js install, and that's all you're going to be using, our install will not work. We'll throw up an error message saying you haven't got the required bits within Visual Studio 2017. In fact, the whole install for VS 2017 is very different from the old days.
And at the moment, they're not providing an ISO image, but that's another whole story. Now, we've got I'm just running IS locally, so I've got localhost, but I've got that port number that we saw in the installation, so port 83. And being that I installed and I'm the administrator, I'm actually logged in as the main account. So Report Server is going to create a couple of things to start with. It's going to create the main user account as administrator, which is obviously the user you logged into at the time, and it creates a guest account. But what we'll do is we'll jump in to the general settings area, and start looking at what needs to be configured. So using the little cog on the top bar here, we will open up the settings page. And there's 4 main sections to the settings page. You just have to wait for GoToWebinar to catch up with the screen scraping. So the 4 sections are General, Email Templates, Status Information, and Forms Authentication. Each of the sections can be edited with their respective icons. So if you see this little pencil, it means that you can click and start editing away. You'll see that you've got your site URL, so if I wanted to, I could change that URL. The authentication mode, so I'm using mixed rather than just Windows or just SQL. The culture that you're going to be working from, and then you've got the all-important SMTP details. Now, as I said before, it can be just as simple as setting up your normal outgoing if you don't have a dedicated mail server. So here I am connected to Office 365. I've got my SSL enabled, so port 587, and then the account name I'm logging into and how I want that email to be sent. At that point, you can send a test email and it will validate everything is correct. Everything around Report Server is based on email templates. So if I'm adding a new user, it's going to want to send that user a confirmation to say, hey, you've been added, you need to set up your account. Obviously, things like password reset, if there's issues with sending reports out, somebody's going to receive an error, etc. So there's a set of templates baked into the product. Now if I open up Activate Account, what we're going to see is the actual template editor. And the other thing to note throughout all this, the product's built obviously using all our own components. So at the heart of the product is the Extra Reports engine, which is available as a developer tool for you to build into your own products. We've got the subject line, and then we've got the body area, and you can actually then select the parameters that you want to include into your message. Now there's a list of supported parameters, and depending on the type of email that you're trying to edit, they're limited in this list. So here we can see we've got a username and we have a link. But the supported parameters are error message, link, login name, things like report category, report name, parameters, tasks, etc. But each of the email templates will limit what's available in the message parameters so that you don't get too confused. And as with any editor, you can come in here and you could start adding things as you go. So please contact me if you have any problems, like typing. And you can render that into a HTML view, or sorry, see the HTML markup, or render that and see what it's going to look like when it's received on their email. Any changes you make, just hit save, and then you can go back to the other templates. So nice and straightforward as far as editing the templates. Now status information shows you, first of all, the version you're running. So this is the latest build available on the website, how many CALs you've got available, and how many CALs you've actually got in total. And obviously that this isn't a registered product rather than in trial mode. And Julie, I don't think I've got 40 people to share this with today, but that's okay.
Oh, it can put me in 40 times. How about that?
I could try that. I mentioned earlier when we talked about setting up the worker part of the process that you needed the validation and decryption keys. So they're set up inside this forms authentication area, and that's how you could then just get access and view those, copy them into where you need to. So from the general setup point of view, nice and straightforward. What we'll do now is jump into user groups. Thinking in terms of the product allows a number of different roles, a number of different groups. The only group here that you can't rename or delete is system administrators. It's a default group that must stay. But all these other ones that we generate for you, you can decide, you know what, I don't really need data administrators, I'll just have one other role, or everybody's going to be system admin. You can play around. To create a new group, you simply click Add Group, give it a name. So let's say DevExpress Report Writers, and Add Group. the group then becomes available under that panel. At this point, I can go through and rename it, or I can say what permissions the group is going to have. And so with the permission side of things, I can say the group can have read, modify, read, create, delete, read, modify, delete, or create. And I can limit it down to specific categories. So this is where it starts to get quite powerful, in that you can assign either users or groups to users and users to groups, and you can control just about every aspect to say, well, Julian can only create reports that belong to this category, or Julian can only modify a specific report, or Julian can do anything at all that he wants. You can also lock it down to specific data models. So I can say, well, Julian can only access a data model, which I'll get to in a second. Go back to user groups. Once you've created your groups, you can jump in and view the group, or you can go through and set the permissions again on the actual groups. Now, I believe, if I remember, we created an account for Julian a little while ago and set him up inside this report creators group as well. So you can assign people to groups and then go down and set the different permissions as well. So once you've created the group, the next natural thing to do would be to actually create some users. So I'm going to come across the user accounts, and same principle. You see this nice big panel. I want to add an account. Once I'm in here, no, we're not going to add you again, Julian, even with all those licenses. So I might add Amanda. And I don't actually know Amanda's email address. Isn't that shocking? Let's just say amanda@devexpress.com. And then I can assign the user group that I want Amanda to be part of. Again, I get told what licenses I've got available, and I can lock that user into a domain account or a report server account. Now, I won't spam Amanda with unnecessary mail. Once you've created a new user, then you will actually see that panel like so. So Julian actually hasn't activated his account yet, which, you know, I think is quite rude, but that's okay.
Go on.
Now, there was an actual link that Julian sent me earlier on an email that he received. Oh, it's an email, that's right. I'm looking for it on Skype, but that's not going to work either, is it? So I'm just quickly grabbing that link so I can show everybody what actually happens when that...
So in essence, earlier on, we added me as an account to Report Server using my julianb@devexpress.com account. I got an email from Report Server saying, you've been asked to activate your account, and there it is. And I sent it along to Paul just for, you know, the purposes of this webinar.
Correct. So the actual email obviously doesn't contain any information that would be a security risk. There's no passwords being transmitted. Julian clicks on the link, and that would then take him to the host of the report server, and you get this activate account option. And Julian, I'm setting a password that I hope I don't forget for you, and I'm going to go activate.
Is it password with the S's replaced by 5 or something like that? I don't know.
No. So once you actually put in your password, now your account has been activated, and at that point you can then log in with the correct authentication, and I'll go Julian B, and this is where Chrome will ask if I want to save it. So you can now see Julian's logged in. He's got access to different things to what we saw before, because obviously he's now a user and not an administrator. So the admin has these areas. Julian only has the category reports and data models that he's been assigned to. So that's pretty cool. Basic administration things such as forgotten password. I'm just going to refresh this page so that we can see that you're now gone from pending to active. I can edit Julian's account and change his permissions at any time, or I can remove him from the system. which I think would be pretty mean of me, really. Okay, so creating groups, assigning permissions, and then creating people. If I jump in, actually I don't want to change any of your basic details. What I want to do is look at your permissions, and we can see that for that particular user, Julian's being given full access to all reports, all categories and scheduled tasks, but he can only read the data models, which means that he's limited to any data that I decide he's got access to. He can't go in and create new models. He can't get access to the underlying data sources without me changing that permission for him.
So imagine, for example, that you have a human resources department. You don't want your general staff to be able to see the reports or generate reports on human resources type data. You want to limit their scope for what they can do, and that's exactly what we're doing here. I have read access to these data models or to the ones which I've been given permission to, but I can't go away and say, I'm sure the HR department's big table is called staff. Now, I wonder if and so on, and so on, and so on.
Correct. So that then brings us to data models. What I'm going to do is, first of all, show you all the different providers that the report server can talk to. Now remember, we made it clear during that installation process, the SQL Server connection is how the report server configuration and management is done itself. But in actual fact, as a product, we can report on just a couple of different databases. Everything from SQLite through a basic XML file and most of the industry standard scenarios. So the next step is to actually create that model to allow the user to be able to access certain elements within that database. And as Julian pointed out, you don't want all the people having access to all the things inside your particular database. So to create a model, we come to the Data Models tab, and we're going to say Add Data Model. We're going to give it a name, and I'm using a baseball table today, so more baseball. A description. You get to select the provider, so again that list, and I've got an instance called SQL Express. I'm just going to use Windows Auth to get to that. I want to drop down the database list. We're going to see all the databases available on my SQL Express instance, so baseball data. If there's any special requirements for additional parameters to your connection string, they can be simply added into this panel here. I'm going to choose Add Data Model, and we will see that we're now inside that particular data model that I called More Baseball. From a point of view of what you can get to inside your database, there's elements such as building a basic query, so you're going to be building that in the designer from scratch, working directly with tables and views, or actually running stored procedures. And there's lots of different options for creating these different data models in that. So what we'll do to start with is we'll say I want to create a query, so edit queries. I'm going to add a new query. What's happening now is the query editor has been invoked, and it's going to show me a list of all the tables and views available inside my database. So here I'm going to say, okay, I want teams, and I can drag teams onto the design surface. I can move things around, and I can see all of the columns that are available. I could tick up here to select everything, or I could tick the all columns. You'll notice as I come through and click on individual fields that I've also got all the properties for that field available, including whether it's an output field, whether I want it sorted, the sort order, whether I want it to be grouped, if I want to run an aggregate, so say I'm working with purchase orders or sales invoices, I can have the query builder do some of that work for me. And being a visual editor, it makes it a lot cleaner. Now I've got teams there, and so with teams I'm going to drag in players, and I'm actually going to drag in some stats. selecting. That'll do. Now with this visual designer, if there are columns that have been mapped correctly in the database, it will actually show you the relationships, but I can also join them manually by dragging on the field. So here I'm going to go player ID to player ID, and if I wanted to, I could say, okay, team ID over to team ID, and you can see that I can manage those links, the type of join it is, and the type of operator that I want in that. I can come through and I can say I want all of the columns, or I want the whole table there, and I can pick and choose from any of these elements to say, well, in actual fact, in this one, I really just want the year, the team ID, I want the player ID, I want the player's first name, last name, and I might want some details from the batting table. And that's any information that's going to be returned by that query. At this point I can do a preview to see what's going to, the select statement is going to look like. So it will show me exactly what's going on. And then I can save that query. Of course, I forgot to rename it, so I'm going to use the edit button to jump back in there. Wait for it to load. And because I've got nothing else selected, we can see on the right-hand side here that I've got the selection properties for the actual query itself. So I'm going to sum basic stats. I can also apply a filter if I want at this point, so I can come through and use the visual filter. I can say, well, I want a particular field, so I want it only if the team was playing between a certain date, and really go to town making sure that that query that's being returned to the data model is giving the end user the power to just work on that data set. Now I've renamed my query, I'll exit back out, and we can see I could go through and continue to add multiple queries inside this data model that I'm building. As well, I'm still in this data model, but I might want to say, okay, in actual fact, I also want the end user to have access just to the players table. And I can choose the whole table, or again, I could come through and start selecting individual fields from the table. So it becomes a powerful element of limiting what the end user has actually got access to, but still giving them a lot of power in their own reporting capabilities. So now for this data model, I've got players and I've got some basic stats, which was a custom query. I'll come back to up to the data model level, and at this point I can press the right button, Paul. That's all good. If I wanted to remove a particular model, so obviously simply use the deletion feature. We saw that when I was inside the user account that I could actually assign specific permissions to the user or to the user group, so that I was then able to limit and say, well, Julian can get information from more baseball but not the baseball data model. Obviously the naming convention I'm using here could be a little more expressive. Once we've got that data model, the next thing we're going to want to do is actually start creating some reports. You can group reports into report categories. Now I've got two examples here. One is Service Center and the other is Finance Department. If I jump into the update, I can rename it if I need to. If I want to create a new category, it's really just a matter of giving it a name. So I think Julian used HR Department, and I've now got my HR department sitting in there. If I jump into the Show Reports feature, I can actually start adding reports directly inside the department. Now you've got to think at this point, there's elements where you can create a report and assign it to a reporting category, or you can be inside a reporting category and create the report. So different ways to achieve the same outcome. I'm going to choose Add Report, and the thing it's going to do here is actually open up the web designer. At this point, your end user you could give them access to the web designer, or you could also give them access to the end user report designer, which is a desktop tool. And I've got mine running here, so I'll just bring that back up. And in essence, they're the same, they deliver the same functions but using the different technologies. So if I'm inside the desktop report designer, I can say I want a new report. Actually have to connect to local host on port 83. Now, if I wanted to use the report server authentication at that point, I could have typed in my username and password, but because I've got the admin account active, I can just use my Windows authentication. Now, what the desktop designer offers is this report wizard, where you can jump through and start by creating a blank report, or you can go through and choose a data-bound report, and it will step you through being able to create some beautiful predefined layouts. At this point, you'll see that the only data sources I have available to me are those that are assigned to my account, so baseball and more baseball. I'm going to choose the data source and go next, and it's now saying, hey, you've got available a query or a straight table. So I'm going to say I want the table, and a list of all the fields are available. So if I'd have limited those fields in the data model setup to only have a certain number of elements, then that's all that, as an end user, I'd now be able to see. Because we're not going to spend too much time in the designer right now, we're going to do a full presentation on it in a couple of weeks. I'll just jump through. At this point, the wizard itself is saying, hey, do you want to create some groups? Do you want some a portrait or a landscape report? Do you want it tabular or column-based? And as I step through, corporate one, next, and Julian's test, just for something different. The designer itself is now going off, building all the elements it needs, and then I can jump in and start editing that report once it's done. But as far as the wizard goes, it's added the fields, it's laid them out in a fashion, it's given me some page info, and there's a lot of power in the actual report designer. A lot of stuff that you can start playing with. At this point, I want to do a print preview. It says, okay, this is a fairly chunky database we're running, so it's creating the report, and I think from memory it's about a 500-page report. So there we go. We can see the status in the bottom left, and this is running off to the server. It's running off via report server to get the data served back into the report. And we can see that I have a nice report with all of the player details that I want. At this point, I'm ready to actually save the report into the report server. So I'm going to choose the upload. I'm going to put it into the HR department, and I'm going to say this is Julian's critical report. Description allows you just to enter what you want, and there's also revision comments. Now, every time a report is modified, it goes through version control, which means that the last time I edited this report, I can go back to that, or I can decide which of the versions is going to be live. So here I could say added, new fields, and hit save, and that's now added that into the report server interface. So I'm going to jump back to the web. I could do exactly the same thing on the web-based designer, and so at this point I've got a blank report here because there's no wizard to actually step through on the web interface, but I can come through, oh sorry, there is, you can do the report wizard at that point, add a data source, and again you can see exactly what's going on with those data models. I'll leave that running and jump back here and go back to my categories, and we can see now that inside reports I've got Julian's critical report. We can see who it was modified by, and if we wanted to, we could preview that report as well, or we could jump in and edit the report. You can filter or sort by particular elements here, so we had it set on date. We can change it to name. We can see some other reports that we've been playing with. You can do a search. So the interface itself is really quite self-explanatory when it comes to working through some of those elements. Once we've got the reports created, if I'm a user that I can jump in and view the report whenever I want, but one of the really nice enterprisey features of Report Server is the fact that I can then schedule the reports to go out whenever I want or as often as I want to whoever I want. So let's take a look now at the scheduling component. As we've seen throughout all these different tabs, it makes it really straightforward to follow the process. I'm going to say add task. The system's then going to come up and say, okay, what type of task do you want? Now the two options here are report and billing statement. I just want to explain the difference between a report and a billing statement. The report itself is a single document that does not depend, that doesn't change depending on who receives it. So it's going to be, okay, this is the report, and boom, whoever I say is going to be a recipient of it, they're all going to get the same report. Nice and straightforward. The term billing statement, think of it in terms of, you know, one of your utility bills. You get the same layout, you get the same sort of information, but it's tailored to you as an individual. So Julian gets his power bill, and it's going to have his name and his usage on that bill versus what I'd receive. So the billing statement allows you to create a uniform document that's tailored specifically to the recipient, and you can change the content of each of those reports using report parameters. Now there's some limits to some of the options that you can select based on that task, the type of task that you want. So we'll just set up to start with a standard report, and we're going to say JB Daily. At this point I can choose the report that I want, so Julian's critical report. I can view the report if I want to make sure it's the right one. And then I've got some other options. I can send the report by email, so it's going to say I simply want a URL that will bring the user back to the reporting system, which of course means that they're going to be a registered user that have a CAL in place. Or I want to actually attach the report as a PDF. So when the report is generated, a PDF will be created, and that PDF will be automatically attached to the outgoing email. Or we can attach it as an Excel spreadsheet. So the report is exported out as an Excel workbook and attached in that fashion. Or the final option is to actually see the report directly embedded inside the email as HTML. So you get to work out which of those options suits the recipients the best. You can send individual recipients, so it's going to, I'd receive an email with just my name, or Julian with just his, or we can send it so that you've got a distribution list and everybody can see who the report has gone to. So again, depending on what you want to do in that essence. The start date, or emailing a blank report, so if the report is run and there's no data for that particular report, do I still want it to be sent? So I could say, well, no, in that instance I don't want to be receiving, or I don't want to be sending mail messages that contain information that's not relevant. I can set up a start date and time, and then nominate whether that's actually an active task. So I could set something up and say, I'll come back, or I can set it to start in a week, or you know what, we're going to disable that report run for a little while. And then you can set the recurrence of the report. What's really cool here is not only can I have it set to daily, every day, but I can also nominate that that's every weekday. So there's no point sending corporate reports to everybody's inbox for Saturdays and Sundays. Or I can say I want the report run every hour, every week, month, year. And in this case, there's no end date. It may be that you're running a particular reporting period and you say, well, you know what, after the next 3 months, the promotional, whatever it is you've done the report on is finished, and so I want it to end either at a date or after it's been sent out X number of times. So it's a great way to set and forget that type of report scenario. And then all we do is hit Add Task, and that's then going to show inside the scheduling model. At this point, it's going to show me I've got my daily JB Daily task options. I can run the report straight away if I want, or I can go through and work through some of those parameters that I talked about. So that's the standard, the report parameters. Now the system's smart enough to say, well, hang on, when you created the report, you didn't actually specify that there were custom parameters inside the report, so there's nothing for me to show in that section. And when we do that session on some more complex, or the report designer itself, we'll talk about setting up report parameters and how to limit data based on those things or feed information in. You then get to nominate who's the recipient of the report. So you've got internal subscribers, which are people that are using the actual task itself. So you can add, I could go through and say, okay, I want to add, and I can add Julian. Click the link if you actually want to see Julian's details. I want to add Julian, and I can add the other account I created for myself as a recipient. Obviously, these users are consumers of the license of the product. But as we pointed out at the installation time, I can also add external subscribers. So at this point, I could say, I want to email Amanda C at DevExpress.com. So I did know Amanda's email address. And it may be that I want to actually email Mahul, so I can include him on this particular report. And I want to email Fred at Microsoft. So as you can see, it doesn't have to be inside the same domain. It can be any number of external subscribers as to that report, which is really, really nice. And then the final option is to say that I want to export the report to a particular place, a file path, a UNC, inside my environment where a PDF is going to be created. So every time that report is run, it will actually then allow me to create a PDF, so I've got that snapshot of the report as a place in time. Now, the actual report file format can correspond to a specific extension, so you could say I want to export it as a PDF or an XLSX or an RTF, even down to a CSV, and based on that extension, that's the type of output that will be stored. You can also, as you see here with this example, specify some other parameters. So if you use year hash, then it's going to get transformed into the current year as 4 digits. And you've got that all the way down to, so year, month, day, hour, and minute. So if you're creating reports regularly, and it's just going to keep creating those files after that. Once you've actually executed the report, you can manage the tasks. So let's go back to scheduling. You can show any generated documents by using this little icon here, little clipboard. Now obviously I haven't run this one, so it's not going to be able to show me much in the way of data at that point. You can jump back in and edit the task in any time or delete it. And just from this snapshot here, you can clearly see when a particular task was run. You get access directly to the report, so I can click on the link there and jump into the report, and when it's next scheduled to be run as well. Okay, we've covered creating user groups, creating users, assigning those to categories. We've talked about the different permission levels, creating reports themselves, setting up the data model, and scheduling automated tasks. Julian, have I missed anything?
Well, it certainly doesn't seem like it, but is there not an API that Report Server comes with? Can't you interact with the Report Server?
You mentioned the API. You brought it up.
I brought
Absolutely.
it up.
Absolutely. So one of the things that was added, obviously, in the last couple of versions was the API. Now, everything I've covered today is available via the Report Server documentation, so there's lots of information there and there's links to videos. But the API itself allows you to interact with the Report Server. And the documentation here will take you through the authentication to the Report Server, how to, with code examples obviously, but then how to interact with the scheduling of jobs. So you could set it up so that maybe you're working with a custom-built CRM and you want to report back to your CRM package as to when a job's scheduled, if it's when it's going to be run, creating new schedules for it, etc. And there's lots of coded examples in our support center for doing some of those things. So thank you for reminding me that yes, there is an API. And
I've got to keep you on your toes, you know.
Absolutely. Now, one of the things that we'll spend time with in the designer session is things like scripting, because the report engine itself has got some phenomenal scripting capabilities that, compared with other reporting products out there, including SRSS or one of those acronyms from Microsoft, there's just so much power inside the reporting engine, and the report server really brings it all to the forefront as a standalone product that you can deliver to the end user, whether the end user is yourself or a client, without you having to build all that infrastructure. I mean, it's the same tools that we deliver to you as developers, but we simply packaged it up in a fashion that allows that it just much cleaner, much nicer. I mean, even from a developer perspective, trying to build the UI and get that security aspect of things happening and license management, it's all there, Julian. To me, I think it's a great product to work with.
Absolutely. And people enjoy using it, as far as I am aware from the feedback we get. It's stable, works well, does what it says on the box.
Which is important. Now, how are we going with questions?
Well, we have quite a few. Is DevExpress Report Server fully compatible with MVC Core or Core MVC? The answer is it's a complete application, so it's not compatible with either, I suppose. In fact, I don't even know. I think it's written in ASP.NET, but I'm not absolutely 100% sure. Let's move on.
So the question on CALs, there's one here, if you've got customers that view reports as needed. If you've got something...
Right. Let's read out the question. What if you have customers that will view the reports as needed, and you have thousands of these users? Do we need thousands of CALs? Yes. Anybody who uses Report Server needs a CAL. So if you have thousands of end users who want to view certain reports, then the best way of doing that is to set up Report Server to generate the reports as PDFs somewhere, and then give your users who aren't going to be using Report Server really, just viewing reports, access to that folder where you're generating the PDFs. Or write an application to do so.
There's a question about, can CALs be transferred between users? Yes, you can make a user or remove a user, and that CAL becomes available again.
Yeah, so it's, if you like, a permanent solution. Delete an existing user, add a new user. You can't just say, well, temporarily for the next week, Joe is going to be using Paul's, account. No, it's remove old, add new.
Does the execute now count towards the disable after X number of occurrences? No. What else do we have here? Yes, we will be. So the question was, will we be having a webinar on the web-based designer? We're going to do a full session on Report Designer at a deep dive, and we'll be covering the web designer as well as the desktop designer and taking you through all elements of that. And that applies to not just Report Server, but all of the reporting products. Julian, there's hundreds of questions.
I know. What software do you use to create your install packages? We write our own. We are a development company after all.
Can we call scheduling from front-end application through Web API? You can call it through the Report Server API, absolutely.
I'm going to have to answer all these afterwards because we've hit the hour length on the webinar. So
does that mean you'll do a blog post, will you, Julian?
I will have to, yes.
I love delegating.
Yeah, brilliant. So
I'm going to hand over to Amanda.
So Amanda, where's
Hey,
the last
guys.
page of the slide?
Last page? There we go.
Yes. Yes, thank you everybody for attending this intro to the DevExpress Report Server.
All right. We do have several webinars coming up throughout March and April. Our next one is next Tuesday, March 14th, using DevExpress MVVM Magic with WPF and WinForms, Part 2. Presented by Don Wibier, and then March 21st, Best Practices for a Fast Responsive Searchable ASP.NET Grid, presented by Web Program Manager Mehul Harry. March 28th, ASP.NET MVC Frequently Asked Questions Answered, and then April 4th, Julian and Paul are back with Demystifying DevExpress Charts, and we are always adding new webinars, so you can always check out devexpress.com/webinars to register and see what's coming up. All right, that is it for this one. Thank you so much to Paul and Julian. Thank you all for joining us. And of course, thank you for choosing DevExpress. Bye-bye.